This is The Michael Bryan Show. Hi everyone, welcome back to the show, and today I am joined with Dr. Ivan Misner, who's the founder of BNI, Business Network International, which is the world's largest business networking organization. We are discussing networking, the power of who you're connected with, and some of the things that you can do with your network and grow your network as well. Ivan, thanks so much for taking the time and joining me today.
Michael, it's truly my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So I'm curious about how BNI got started, and if you can remember perhaps what your first networking event was.
Yeah, well, we started in January 8th, 1985, but technically we met a month earlier, just because I had some friends and I wanted to run this idea by them. And so our first informal meeting was in December of 84. And that came about because I went to a lot of networking groups. I went to many, many different networking groups. I was a management consultant. I got all my business through referrals and through speaking engagements. And so I went to a lot of networking groups that were just incredibly mercenary. I'd leave those meetings feeling like I'd been slimed and that I needed to go home and get a shower because everyone was trying to sell to me. And I really didn't like that. It wasn't my style. And then I went to these other groups that were totally social. It was happy hour and hors d'oeuvres, and nobody was doing business. And I was like, this is a waste of time. And so, I wanted a networking organization that had. I wanted to be in a networking organization that focused on business but wasn't mercenary, and was relational but not totally social. And so that was the idea that I ran by a couple dozen people in December of 84. And we had our first meeting literally the first week in January, or just about the first week, January 8th. And we were off to the races. I mean, I'd like to tell you I had this vision of an international organization. Michael, we now have 11,700 groups, in over 75 countries. But I just needed some referrals for my consulting practice. But it snowballed. People kept asking me to open up a chapter for them. Because, as you know, we only take one person per professional classification. So it just snowballed. At the end of a year, we had 20 chapters without me trying. And that's when I realized that I had really, truly struck a chord in the business community and started to create my plan to scale the business.
A lot of people try to network, they try to, build their contact lists for their business. But how do you get the balance right between relational but not transactional?
Well, I think core values are the key. You've got to have a set of core values that you constantly repeat and constantly train on. One of our principal core values is the idea of giver's gain, the idea that if I help you, you'll help me, and we'll all do better as a result of it. Now, that phrase, it's more than a phrase to me. It's a way of living one's life. It's a perspective to view and interact with the world. It's an attitude, not an expectation. And when it's applied properly, it'll change your life. And when it changes enough lives, it'll change the world, which is our vision statement, is changing the way the world does business. And I think that core value and lifelong learning, because we don't teach this in colleges and universities anywhere in the world, accountability, recognition, all of these are the core values that help to balance both a focus on business as well as a focus on being relational. And chapters that practice those core values effectively are great chapters.
It sounds to me anyway like it becomes a more natural thing where you're networking, you're meeting people that either match your values or at least can connect with them in some way. Is that the way that it's leaning then? We're networking, trying to build your network, connections, contacts is a natural thing, but it seems like it's more of a long-term thing.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely a long-term thing. My latest book is called Networking's a Marathon, Not a Sprint. And that is so incredibly true. It's a marathon. It takes time. It's, in a way, a BNI membership is sort of like a gym membership. You go to the gym and it takes time to get, the body that you want to achieve. And if you achieve it and then you go, okay, I'm done. And then you stop going, well, guess what? You're going to lose that tone that you wanted. And so it really is a marathon. Take a deep breath. It takes time. It definitely takes time to build relationships where people know you and trust you enough to generate referrals with you. And if you do that in the context of really strong core values, then you're going to do well. I mean, 11,700 groups, 75 different countries. You could go to almost any country in the world, sit in on a BNI meeting, have no idea what they're saying because you don't know the language. But if you know BNI, you would know exactly where they are in the meeting and what's going to come next because it operates the same all around the world.
Do you find that it has anything to do with, let's say, building stronger connections? Because especially when social media started to impact things, I found that it can keep people at the same position. Like it keeps people at arm's length. You only show them what you want them to see, that sort of thing, where the way you described things earlier is it builds like a stronger connection for maybe a smaller group of people.
Yeah. So let's talk about connections. And not just contacts. There's this whole issue of quality versus quantity. If you really want to build a powerful personal network, you need to have enough contacts. But the only thing that's more important than the number of contacts is the quality of those contacts or the connections. If your network is a mile wide and only an inch deep, it'll never be very powerful. You need to have a decent sized network, but in some places it needs to go deep. You need to really have good relationships. And, you say, oftentimes people hide their true self. Well, I think you're right, but you can't do that for 52 weeks in a row very effectively because in BNI, we meet every week. Yeah, we have holidays off, but we meet at least 48 to 50 times a year. Well, at some point, your real self kind of is going to show up, especially when you start doing business with people. And, one part of the meeting is testimonials where people stand up and talk about how good you are at what you do. A contact is in your phone, but a connection is in your corner. These are people that are really there for you. And real connections are about opening doors, giving honest feedback, creating emotional support. And relationships are built in layers, not in leaps. It takes time.
Are there any signs or symptoms of people, let's say, are moving through the quality spectrum? So in terms of the connections, maybe you meet for the first time, you make eye contact and that's as far as it goes. But how do you know when someone's, in air quotes, ready to progress through this and maybe get a bit closer to being in your corner?
Well, let me start with the foundation of everything I teach, which is the VCP process: visibility, credibility, profitability. And it's a referral process, not a sales process. So first, if you want to build a powerful network, you got to be visible. People have to know who you are and what you do. But then you have to establish credibility, and that's the one that takes time. That's where people know who you are, they know what you do, they know you're good at it. And then and only then can you get to profitability, where people know who you are, they know you're good at it, and they're willing to refer business to you. Again, this is not a sales process, it's a referral process. So you might go to your own clients and they're not giving you referrals. So you're at credibility, but you're not even at profitability in a referral relationship, sometimes even with your own clients. So you go to networking events to work your way through the VCP process. I remember years ago, I was in London and I was a keynote speaker, and there were about 900 people in the audience. And I was watching them operate. It wasn't a BNI event. I was watching them operate, and it seemed very transactional. And when I had a chance to speak, I asked everyone, I don't know what possessed me. I'd never done it before or since. I asked everybody there, I said, how many of you are here? Raise your hands if you're hoping to possibly sell something today. And Michael, 900 people raised their hands. I mean, the whole room raised their hands. I said, great. Second question, how many of you are here today hoping to, maybe just possibly buy something? No one raised their hands. Not one single person. This is what I call the networking disconnect. People show up at networking events to sell, but they're not there to buy. So why go to a networking event? You go to a networking event to work your way through the VCP process, which gets to your question of how do you know that you want to possibly build a relationship with that person. Well, it starts with visibility, but you've got to get to credibility, and if you're not in a network like BNI where you're meeting every week, but you meet them one time, then you use a process that I've written about called the 24/7/30 follow-up system. It's in one of my books, Networking Like a Pro. 24/7/30 follow-up system. Would you like to hear that?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. So you meet somebody at a networking event, you really don't have any kind of relationship, but you think that this would be a good person to develop a professional relationship with. And so you want to expedite it a bit and not just wait until the next chamber function or association function where you're going to possibly see them again. So what you do is you get their card and you ask a few questions. I talk about small talk is really, if you're doing it right, it's smart talk, not small talk. And you're asking questions. A good networker has two ears and one mouth and uses them both proportionally. They're like an interviewer. You're asking me questions and you're allowing me to elaborate, to talk, to explain. And so a good networker is, really trying to be interested more than interesting, especially in the beginning of the conversation. So, you're talking to them, you get some information, you ask them what they love about what do they do, of course, what do they love about what they do? What are some of the, their best clients, that kind of thing. Just get them to open up a little bit. Take a note or two down. One of the things I like, and this is really important for the next stage, is to find out what social media platform they're really active on. Are you most active on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or, God help us all, TikTok? Where are you active? And jot that down. And I'll usually ask, is it okay if I write on the back of your card so that I can remember? Because if you meet 20 or 30 people, you're going to forget the conversations. And by the way, if you're doing this in Asia, don't write on their card. It's bad form in Asia to write on anybody's business card. So have a notepad with you if you're in Asian countries, which leads you to within 24 hours, reach out to them, send them a handwritten note, which nobody ever does anymore, or an email and say, hey, Michael, it was really nice meeting you at the such and such event last night or last week. And I hope our paths cross again. And that's it. Don't sell to them. Within 7 days, get in on their social media because you've asked them where are they active. So you get in on their social media and then start posting some comments. Hey, I really love this. Don't stalk them, but interact with them. Whatever you do, don't try to sell to them. And then and by the way, you go where they want. You go where they are, not where you are. And my kids taught me this years and years and years ago. My oldest is 39. And when she was 17, I would call her and she wouldn't answer the phone. And I would text her and she'd respond immediately. I'm like, hey, honey, when I saw her at dinner that night, I held up the phone and I said, this is a device where if you put it up to your head, you can hear people talk to you and then you talk in the bottom. And she's like, yeah, whatever, Dad. But I had to text her if I wanted to respond. My next daughter, I would call her nothing. I'd text her nothing. And I asked my wife, Dorian's not responding to me. She said, oh, you have to WhatsApp her. Now, Dorian's 35. This was many years ago. This was when Dorian was like 17. And I said to my wife, what's WhatsApp? I don't know what that is. So I had to download WhatsApp. And I tested it. I called Dorian nothing. I texted Dorian nothing, but I messaged Dorian on WhatsApp and they're like, hey, Dad, what's going on? Like, okay. So text and WhatsApp. Then came my son. My son didn't like WhatsApp. He didn't like to talk on the phone. He didn't text, but he was a gamer. So I'm in like my late 40s at that time. And I knew he was on a platform called Steam. So I got on Steam and I bought a game because I knew that Steam had an instant messaging feature. And so if I instant messaged him on Steam, he would respond immediately. Yeah, Dad, what do you want? And it was just hysterical. I realized that it wasn't where, if I wanted to talk to my children, it wasn't, they weren't going to respond to me the way I wanted to communicate with them. They were going to respond to me quicker if I connected with them in the way they wanted. And so the lesson here is, if you really want to build a relationship with that a professional relationship with that person, go where they stay. Go to their Facebook page or LinkedIn page or Instagram, whatever they like to do. That's where you want to connect. Do that within 7 days and don't sell to them. Last, within 30 days, what you want to do is reach out to them and say, hey, Michael, it was really nice meeting you at such and such event. I've been following some of your posts, some of your social media posts. I really like this one. I'd love to get to know you better, know more about what you do. Maybe you'd be willing to know a little bit more about what I do. Maybe we could get together for coffee and just spend some time and learn about each other's business. Or if they're a long distance away, let's get on Zoom and chat a little bit. I'd like to learn more about what you do. And when you do that, Michael, don't sell to them. If they happen to need your product or service, they'll tell you, but don't sell to them yet. You're not even at credibility yet. You're just building visibility. You're just starting maybe to establish a little bit of credibility. And if they wanted your business, they'd tell you. Even a blind squirrel can find a nut. You can stumble over business and networking, but that's not what networking's about. Networking's about building relationships. So the 24/7/30 process helps get you through visibility to beginning to create credibility a little quicker. And then once you're at credibility, you can move it to profitability. Long answer, but that's what I teach people in that process.
Oh, it was such a funny story that you shared there about trying to connect with people where they hang out. I can't tell you how many times people even try to reach out to me through email, and that's probably the most effective way, but all you do is just join the back of the never-ending line of...
Yep, the white noise of communication.
Yeah, definitely. And it made me think, actually, of going from visibility to credibility. How would we do that? How do we share it in the right way?
Well, it definitely takes time. And, one of the ways that you can get to credibility pretty quickly is a technique that you use to develop friendships. And that is, once you know a little bit about what the other person does, ask them, how can I help you? I love what you do. It's very interesting. How can I help you? And oftentimes, you will be able to find a way to help them. And once you start helping somebody, once you start working with them, remember that our principal core value is givers gain. So once you start giving and helping, you're establishing a relationship. You establish that relationship and you give referrals or you give advice or you give a connection to somebody. Once you feel, that they're trustworthy enough that you start connecting them with people, then you move to credibility fairly quickly. And it really does work. I remember another true story. I was doing a radio interview years ago, and I talked to the interviewer about this idea of asking, how can I help you? And it was a good interview, but he stopped me in the middle of it, and he was like, well, that old trope, that doesn't work. That just doesn't work. And we're live on the radio. And I'm like, well, actually, it really kind of does. But if that's how you feel, that's fine. Let's move to the next side of it. And so I kind of moved on. At the end of the interview, we were off air. It was a live interview. We were off air, and we're talking about some of the people he'd interviewed. And I said, well, tell me the kinds of people that you're looking for, because I may know some of them. And so he gave me the kinds of people he was looking for, and he named a couple of people. And I said, yeah, I know that person. Would you like me to make an introduction? And he's like, oh, yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you. And I said to him, we were on the telephone, and I said, and that's how the phrase, how can I help you, works. But you don't have to use that phrase. I just asked who you were looking for, which is the same as how can I help you? And I remember him saying, touche. That you're absolutely correct. It does work, and you don't have to use those words to make it work.
I suppose in some ways it becomes, if you make them feel good initially by helping them, then I know you mentioned referrals before, surely they'd be more likely to refer others to you as well if you manage to help them, that is.
Yeah, no question about it. And the timed repetition of seeing people on a regular basis, which is one of the reasons why in BNI we have weekly meetings. It's that weekly meeting that helps move the relationship into credibility much quicker. Now, not all organizations, meet weekly, some meet monthly. And my advice, though, if you're like in a chamber of commerce or something, go to those chamber events. So at least you can see these people more often, and then do those one-to-ones. That within 30 days, set up a one-to-one. We have hard data that shows in BNI that one-to-ones make a big difference. We had a university study that was done in Europe. It took a look at the number of one-to-ones that were being generated in the region, chapter by chapter, and we found that people who did 4 one-to-ones a month compared to people who did 1 one-to-ones a month, they gave the people who did 4 a month or 1 a week, they gave almost exactly 100% more referrals, double the referrals of the people who only did 1 a month. But here's the beautiful part. They received almost exactly 100% more referrals. I mean, we have hard data on this. By doing the one-to-ones, they gave more business and they got more business. And so the one-to-ones are where the rubber meets the road in establishing credibility and maintaining credibility, contact points, touch points where you're staying connected with somebody is really important, because benign neglect can ruin a relationship gently and softly over time. And so touch points are really important.
But I wonder, when you think of the scalability of it, so you mentioned, 4 is double 1, I imagine 8 or 10 might be double 4, that sort of thing. It sounds like they're beneficial. But what's stopping networkers from burning out or chasing the numbers? And in some ways, we've mentioned networking being informal, possibly more of a natural thing. Things will come. You don't need to be impatient. Just wait, keep asking, keep trying to help people, and eventually it will come round to you, sort of thing. But what's stopping that from becoming like an unhealthy situation for business owners and companies?
Well, so first of all, I would go into it with a plan and with a system and a process in mind. So, set up a number of one-to-ones over the course of the month. It's not as passive as I certainly didn't mean for it to sound passive, because it's not a passive process. It's a very active process, a very thoughtful process. But you can burn yourself out, which is the other end of the spectrum that you're talking about. And so let's take one-to-ones as an example. A true story. I knew a guy, he was a BNI member, and he thought if 1 a week was good, 4 a week would be better. And I remember saying to him, man, you can burn yourself out. This is, he was visiting BNI chapters. He would go to multiple chamber events. He was a member of a service club. He was just doing a ton of meetings a week. And he had a wide network, but not a deep network. So he was not doing a lot of touch points and staying connected with these people. He just kept meeting people and meeting people and meeting people. And I told him, you're going to burn yourself out. You're treating this like a sprint, not a marathon. And he did, in fact, burn himself out after about 1.5 years. He just was exhausted and was not building his business because he wasn't getting to credibility. He had tons of visibility, but had very little credibility. And that was because he was sprinting through it. He wasn't really making effective use of the connections, the contacts he had. He wasn't turning the contacts into connections.
That's an interesting point. So he was chasing the next person without trying to take things to credibility with maybe, whoever else was saying yes to that question of, how can I help you? Do you need anything from me? Is there any way that I can assist you with what you need? That sort of thing. Once we've established the credibility side, once we've done that, whether it be testimonials, helping the individual person, what happens next?
Well, you have to learn how to ask for referrals. And one of the best ways, believe it or not, to ask for referrals is to actually educate people about what's a good referral for you. So, I'm coming from within the BNI context, so we're meeting every week. And when you're meeting every week, what people do wrong is say the same thing every week. Or they'll say, I'm a full service, whatever. I can handle anything within this field. That's a horrible weekly presentation. Instead, what you want to do is be specific. Specific is terrific when you're talking to people on a fairly regular basis. The more laser specific that you can get about what it is that you do, and then next week talk about something else, and next week talk about something else, and next week talk about something else, then what you're doing over the course of a year is you're giving a lot of information. You see, we all have in our brains this reticular activating system that screens out stuff that we don't need to know. And I mean, there's lots of examples of it. It's like, you buy a new car and then all of a sudden you see your car driving around everywhere. It's like, oh, they have the same car I do, or they have the same car I do. Or you're in an airport and there's all of these announcements that are going on. And then you hear your name out of all of the noise that's going on. You hear your name or your flight number and you go, oh, that's me. And so your reticular activating system is open to hearing those things. Well, what you want to do is you want to get people, you want to get their reticular activating system open to hearing your message. And the best way to do that is to not repeat it over and over again, but to give them new tidbits of information so that when they hear somebody say something, they remember your presentation and are able to refer you. I mean, one of the best examples of it was a florist who came in one week to a meeting and he had bought a flower at a grocery store, and then he brought in one of his roses. He brought in a rose from a grocery store. And, he asked everybody in the group, what do you think of this rose? And they knew it was from a grocery store because it was wrapped in cellophane, had a sticker on it. And he said, hey, the grocery store here right next door, they do a nice job on roses. And he took the cellophane off. And he said, well, let me show you my rose. And he pulled out from under the table his rose. His rose was twice as long. It was a long stem rose. It had to be almost twice as long. And it had a huge flower at the end, whereas the grocery store rose had a small flower at the end. And then he spent the rest of the minute talking about stems. He said, look at the stem of the grocery store rose. It's thin. And look at the stem of my rose. It's really thick. It's almost as thick as a pencil. And the thicker the stem, the more water it draws up, the larger the flower, and the longer it will live. My flower will last at least 7 days longer than a grocery store rose. And then he held them up, and this was the great part. The next two things he did, he held both of them up by the tip of the bottom of the stem, and he wobbled them back and forth. And the grocery store rose just flopped back and forth, flop, 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 because of that thin stem. His rose didn't flop at all. He said, here's their stem, here's my stem. He said, there's only 3 cents difference in price, 3 pennies difference in price between the grocery store rose and my rose. Theirs is more. He totally had the chapter at that point. It's like, they would now, all he did was talk about a rose. As a matter of fact, all he did was talk about the stem of a rose, but nobody would forget that. That's a great way to educate people how to refer you. And then next week, talk about something else. And the week after that, talk about something else.
How would you suppose that conversation would go, let's say, with the same person? So you meet weekly and you see the same person, you start introducing yourself, you start maybe having a coffee with them in between, and then you mention possibly talking about different things per week. I'm guessing you bring new people in, but how would you suppose you affect that person that heard your presentation or the information on the first week?
Well, you're doing the same thing, hopefully, that the florist I just described was doing, which is talking about something different every week. And then when you do a wine, we recommend that members obviously do one-to-ones because you're going to generate a lot more business. So when you do that one-to-one, that's where you talk about the kinds of clients that would be good referrals for you or potentially good business for you. So for the florist, certainly a wedding planner, a jeweler, anybody involved in the wedding industry, a jeweler, a travel agent, the florist, a photographer, all of these people are great connections for the florist. And so hopefully some of those are in that particular network. I call this, by the way, Your contact sphere, these are professions that are in compatible, non-competitive professions. They actually help one another instead of getting in the way of each other. Uh, what I just described is I call the wedding mafia. Once they bring you in, they don't let you out. And they work together really well. And there are many different groups of contact spheres that can create a power team, which is a contact sphere that's actually working together to help generate referrals. So, in the one-to-one, you have that kind of discussion and you ask, how can you help? And again, specific is really important. We tend to shotgun our presentations or our discussions about what we do rather than sharpshoot it. I'll give you another example. In one meeting, I said to everybody, stand up and give the name of somebody that you've been trying to connect with. Not the name of the business, the name of the individual at the business that you've been trying to connect with. And there was a lot of grumbling. It's like, it's a waste of time. And I said, just give it a try. And so they went around the room and everybody was saying they're looking for this person or that person. And I had one person in particular that was really grumbling. And she said, I don't see the value in this, but she stood up and she said, I would like to meet Marty Rodriguez. Marty was the #1 real estate agent for that franchise in the world, 8 out of the last 10 years. She said, I can't get past Marty's assistant. Does anyone know someone that might know Marty? Michael, one of the members, this is a group of 35, 40 people. One of the members stood up and said, Sally, Marty's my sister-in-law. and Sally said, oh my goodness, why didn't you ever tell me that? And of course, the woman said, you never asked. And so she made the contact and the connection. And so it's counterintuitive. But the more specific you are with people that you're at credibility with, the more likely you're going to get a referral.
I find it fascinating how simply educating people about what you want in a way can make a big difference. It's almost like everyone's there to try to help in some way. It would be more helpful for them if you knew what you wanted. Almost like that's more important in a way, like just finding out what you want.
Well, and that's why it's important to really plan in a BNI context, when you're meeting weekly, plan your presentations. Really have, I'll give you another example. I had a person in a group who heard me talk about, being laser specific. And so what he decided to do was to create a curriculum for his business. He called it My Business 101, like a university course, My Business 101. And he came up with a list of about 50 different topics about his business. And he put the 50 topics in his calendar, one for each week. And he didn't write anything about the topic. He just put the topic in. I know one of the things that you want to talk about today is how do you say no respectfully? So it'd be like that, put in, how do you say no respectfully? So you put in that concept, and that's what he did. And then 2 days before his meeting, he would get a reminder, hey, your weekly presentation is in 2 days. So he would spend literally 10, 15 minutes because it was his business. He knew his business. So he'd spend 10 or 15 minutes writing up talking points. And now this is a guy that was not getting business, and he'd been a member for a couple of years. He really wasn't getting a lot of business. He was getting business, but not a lot. And he did this My Business 101. And so every week he went in with a laser specific, like the rose, asking for a particular name of a person every single week. He said over the last 2 years, he had a 600% increase in his referrals. And I asked him, I said, did you say 600%? He said, yes. He said, all I did different was I had a plan on what I was going to talk about. And I got laser specific. And so I was educating people how to refer me. And I was able to pierce that reticular activating system that you talk about. People remembered me when they came across something that I talked about over the last couple of years. And so it's really powerful when you do it right. And so you can't just wing it. You got to plan it and work it, but you do it like a marathon, not like a sprint.
I wonder how networking has shifted over the years. So you've been doing this for a while now, Ivan. I wonder, has things like the internet and social media and possibly even AI, has that impacted networking, do you think? And I wondered if you could share possibly how it's changed.
People are to a large extent people. I mean, we live in a high-tech, high-touch society. The more technologically advanced we become, the more important it is to connect with people. I remember very vividly, it was 1996, and I was getting a lot of media interviews, and the big question in 96 was, isn't the internet going to put BNI out of business? And I said no, because I mean, I think it's a fantastic tool, and that if you don't, it's really important that you lead disruption so that you don't get disrupted. So I want to use the internet as a way of scaling the company, and so no, I don't think it's going to get in the way. So 11 years later, I was having people say, did the internet impact your business? So from 1985 to 1996, we opened 500 groups of BNI. And so I told people that I was interviewing, from 1996 to 2007, we had 5,000. So I said, yeah, the internet's impacted the company significantly. We've grown significantly. So I believe, I'm a real believer in the utilization of technology to really superpower your efforts. I mean, when COVID hit, BNI went from, we had 9,800 groups when COVID hit. So we went from 9,800 weekly meetings in person to 9,800 weekly meetings online. And during the middle of COVID, during all of COVID, BNI grew. We didn't decrease membership, we increased membership. We have 41 years of consecutive growth through recessions, through great economies, through COVID. How does that happen? It happens because personal relationships are still really, really important. And I urge people to use the technology to their advantage. Otherwise, they're going to get disrupted by the technology. And there's lots of examples of it. Kodak is probably one of the best. Kodak invented the digital camera. They invented it. They had the patent on the digital camera. And they decided they didn't want to mess with their film processing business. So they licensed out the digital technology to other companies. And there was actually a vice president who wrote a memo saying, yeah, let's license this out. Besides, who's ever going to really look at photographs on a computer? He actually said that in a memo. So that's the way you get disrupted. If you don't immerse and engage in that technology to help you be more successful. And we are absolutely doing that. And we've always been an early adopter. I mean, look at our domain. Our domain name is bni.com. You can't have a 3-letter domain if you weren't an early adopter to the technology. And so, yeah, I have a lot of energy on this. And I think people complain as though it's an Olympic event. It's not, I've checked. And they look for, all of the problems, and they focus on the problems rather than the solutions. I see technology as an opportunity and as a way of solving problems. And if your listeners don't, trust me, your competitors will, at least some of them, and they're going to put you out of business.
I have noticed that the idea of being able to communicate with one another has definitely shifted. It's definitely shifted towards something. Whether it's better or worse, it's definitely moving in a particular direction. So, when we were thinking about how people communicate and how to build relationships, and then we think if it gets a bit out of hand, then you need a system to be able to avoid burnout and things like that. What else could we do to maximize our time as a networker, whether it's creating boundaries, having a system? What other things have you noticed that can make a difference?
Yeah, well, I think the system is critical, and following a system, and that's one of the reasons why BNI has been so successful, is that we have a system, And the people who follow the darn system do really, really well. Now, you talk about seeing a difference in communication, and I'll give you some of that, but let me read a quote to you. The children now love luxury or comfort. They don't have social skills. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders, and love to play games. I'm paraphrasing. Any idea who wrote that?
No idea.
Socrates.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. I mean, every generation looks at the next generation and goes, oh, yeah, they just don't get it. They just don't get it. So, I go back to, I started BNI when I was 28. I'm 69. We've been around 41 years. Michael, I was the youngest person in the first 2 or 3 groups of BNI. There was nobody under 28 in the group. And I can tell you for a fact, no one knew how to network. That's why BNI took off so well, is that we created a system and a process and education. We taught people how to do this effectively. And so we didn't know how to network. I was method acting my way through the process. So, I think what happens is as you mature and you learn what works and what doesn't work, and you have mentors who help you, you get better at the things that you're doing. And so people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s have developed skills that people that are younger haven't quite developed yet. And so we look at, Gen Z, and we look at, the young people today and say they just, they don't know how to communicate. Well, actually, they kind of do. They do some better than we do online. They totally get it online. They communicate very effectively online. And I think that's a transferable skill. And I see it as a transferable skill to young people who have joined BNI and are now being taught by their mentors how to do it in person, which happened 41 years ago, but without all the content that we have today. So I have faith in young people. I don't write them off quite so quickly as some people do. Not that you did, but as some people do.
I definitely agree with that as well. And I've found that it's surprising how effective networking can be if you do it right, whether it's online or offline. I guess in some ways online, as you said, your son's communicating on Stream or Steam, I think it was. And
yeah.
Some are on WhatsApp and some will be on TikTok, as you said, and it just becomes this sense of just trying to come up with how they communicate.
Yeah.
And then trying to use that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I would have told someone in 2019 that 30% of our organization did not meet in person every week, people would have said I'm crazy. Certainly people in my organization would have said I was crazy. But today, after COVID, we have 70% of our organization went back to meeting in person. So of the 11,700 groups, 70% went back to meeting in person. 15% are hybrid, meaning they meet in person once a month and they do the rest of the month online. And 15% meet 100% online. Now, I still think in person has power. And so what we have trained those chapters to do, and most of them are doing it, is that they're throwing a social once every couple of months where people get together in person. Maybe at someone's office, maybe at somebody's house, maybe at a restaurant, but they get together in person and meet every couple of months so that there is that personal connection. Because I still, I'm an old guy with gray hair. I still love meeting in person, but I do love the ease of operation of meeting online. And I think young people will get this figured out.
Do you have a modern networking strategy? So, if you were to, whether it's redo BNI for today or this idea of trying to meet as many people as you can and yet still trying to get to the credibility and the referral process that we spoke about, what are some of the things that modern networking, what's different about it? How is it different to what it was? And do you have any best practices?
Well, I mean, I think the basis of building personal relationships isn't different. You might do it to some extent online and to some extent in person. So the tools are different, but it's a matter of still building relationships with people using different tools that that can actually help us a great deal. For example, when I started BNI, by 1986, the second largest line item in my budget, and this is not an exaggeration, we started opening up groups around the United States. The second largest line item in my budget was the telephone bill. Employees were number one, telephone bill number two. Today, I couldn't even tell you where the telephone bill is in our budget. It's virtually zero. The technology enables us. Technology flattens the communication hierarchy. It allows people to do interviews like you and I are doing over a computer. We can do, live webinars where hundreds of thousands of people can come and see you on screen and ask questions. It enables people to connect. Podcasts. I have a BNI podcast where members from all around the world are able to connect directly with me. And so it's the utilization of the technology and finding ways to personally do that. Now, the beauty of the technology is that now the phone call is nothing. You can Zoom around the world, and so we have our 11,700 chapters. It's 354,000 members. They can connect directly worldwide on it. We have a platform called BNI Connect. So you can actually reach out to a person in another country and start a dialogue and do it easily and do it virtually for free. And we didn't have that ability 41 years ago. We didn't have that ability 12 years ago. It was, when BNI Connect came about. So the technology enables us to have closer relationships with more people. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but it makes me think as well. It must be so easy to burn out, much more than possibly earlier that when we were speaking about how to avoid it, using technology and Zoom calls and webinars and some face-to-face things as well, and then you're messaging on your phone in between meetings. It must be so easy to take things over the edge.
Yeah, well, you got to pace yourself. That's a message that I've been using for years. You got to pace yourself. But you do have a broader reach. Think about it. When I started BNI, and certainly for the first 20 years, if you wanted to network at all, you had to get in your car, drive 5-10 miles to some event, get out, get into the event, mix, mingle, get back in your car, drive back. That takes a lot of time. A lot of that's been eliminated through the use of technology. Plus, connecting with people globally is so much easier with the technology. So people need discernment. Quantity and quality are both important, but I would say, quantities, if you're right-handed, as I am, quantity is my left hand, quality is my right hand. Quality is a bit more important than quantity. You do need to have a certain number of contacts in order to find the kind of people that you really want to work with. But that's not as hard as it sounds. Metcalfe's law, which is about networks, technology networks, shows that if there's like a room of 16 people, you've got, I think it's like 256 connections with 16 people. But if you're in a room of 32 people, then you've got something like 1,050 some connections. That's Metcalfe's law because it's the multiple of all the people in the room. Now you add to that Dunbar's law, which is how many people does the average person know? Dunbar was a social scientist. And the average person knows around 150 people that he or she would recognize their face, probably their name, but they know who the person is. So if you take Metcalfe's law and you have 32 people, and those 32 people know 150 people, you're talking about 100,000 connections. And so you just pace yourself, use discernment. And when you do that, networking is the most powerful way to build a business. It's the most powerful way that the average business can be built. And it can be fun. I mean, I used to teach people how to cold call. God, I did that long enough to know I don't want to ever do that again. And when I was a management consultant, I taught a company cold calling, and it's a horrible, horrible thing. Works. Don't get me wrong. I have people get mad at me and say, hey, it works for me. Great, it works for you. I just hate it. It's not fun. I'd much rather, go to a network and mix and mingle than cold call people.
How would you suppose people are able to make these decisions, whether it's in person or online, work out whether they're going to be a contact or possibly add to this visibility, credibility model that we spoke about earlier? How do we discern between these things?
Yeah. So you use you want to find overlapping areas of interest. One of the techniques I created in a book, I think you can find it also in the book Networking Like a Pro, the second edition of Networking Like a Pro, is what I call the gains exchange. And so we recommend that people use the gains exchange when they're networking, particularly with somebody that they kind of know already. If you're doing it with a total stranger, they may or may not be confused by it, but it's a really effective technique. And GAINS is an acronym. It stands for Goals, Accomplishments, Interests, Networks, and Skills. I'll repeat that. It stands for Goals, Accomplishments, Interests, Networks, and Skills. And so you sit down with the person and you talk about your personal and or professional goals, and you let them talk about their personal or professional goals. You talk about some of your accomplishments, let them know who you are. What are some of the cool things that you've done in life that you're proud of? And then you let them do it. And so you go through all of these goals, accomplishments, interests, networks, and skills, all 5. Now, the first time I tested this, I tested it with a group of people, and I had 2 people. One was a lawyer, one was an architect, and they were like, we don't want to do this. And I said, why? They actually said, because it's weenie. It's weenie. What do you mean it's weenie? It's silly. We don't want to do it. I said, okay, I got it. I'm testing this out. So when it's all done, I'm going to give you a form and just say how much you hated it. And that's fine. But if you don't mind, just give it a try so I can see how it works or doesn't work. And they grumbled and they said, okay. So they talked about their goals. They talked about their accomplishments. And then they got to interests. And they found out now this was in the US, they found out they were both soccer coaches for their sons' soccer teams, also called football in most countries. So they were both coaches for their sons' soccer teams. Well, that was it. They never got to networks. They never got to skills. They spent the rest of the hour talking about soccer and how they coached and different coaching techniques. And they agreed that they would help one another. One of them would go and scout the other's team that they're going to play in a week or two and film part of it. And then the other person would go and film someone that they're going to play. And then these guys who'd been in this group together for almost a year had never done business with each other. They'd never given referrals to each other. They liked each other, but they had never actually given a referral to each other. It was less than 3 months, they started giving referrals to each other. The first person gave a referral to the other one. How did that happen? What happened? Because they built a relationship. How did they build a relationship? They found an overlapping area of interest using a simple tool called the Gains Exchange, where they found out they were both soccer coaches, and that began the relationship. And when you have a relationship, you really care about somebody, you want to help them. And that's how networking should work.
That sounds like the sort of thing that could almost build stronger relationships straight away, in a way where you would skip a couple of steps, my name's Michael, nice to meet you, that sort of thing. As soon as you work out that you've got an overlapping interest in soccer, you end up going to the same games as each other. Maybe you meet if your teams are playing against each other, and no hard feelings, Hulu. Maybe you place a bet outside of the match, that you start getting a bit friendly and competitive, and all of that came about because you both like soccer versus trying to start from scratch.
Right. It's a tool that's a force multiplier in expediting the relationship. It still takes time, but it's less time because you've found an overlapping area of interest and you have somebody who, an associate who you've become friends with. And which is really interesting because when I started BNI, it was just for referrals. And we did lots and lots of surveys and people, joined for referrals. But over the last 10, 15 years, we've done surveys and we found that people stay in a network for the referrals and a close second, relationships. Yet when they joined, relationships wasn't even in the top 6, 7, 8 categories. I'm not joining for the relationships. I'm joining for referrals, but they stay for the referrals and for the relationships. And so, creating those connections rather than just contacts is the core of building a powerful personal network, because your network is a beacon of hope in a sea of fear. We live in a crazy world, but the people who are really connected with you are there to help you and support you. And I know that, and I've seen it. I remember so vividly in the early 90s, the Northridge earthquake. And I lived in Southern California then. And I was supposed to visit a chapter that met 2 or 3 days after. I think it might have been 3 mornings after the Northridge earthquake. And I show up, and it turns out that the restaurant the night before had been shut down because there was damage and they were worried the building would collapse. But the manager never called the chapter president. So everybody shows up to the meeting. But we couldn't get into the restaurant. And so the president was brilliant. He said, okay, well, we're gonna hold a short meeting in a circle in the parking lot. There was less than 30 people, probably 26, 30. And we all got in a big circle. And he said, instead of doing your weekly presentation, what I want you to do is just give us a minute on how are you doing? Are you okay? Is your family okay? That's it. That's all I want. Tell us how you are. And everybody went around. I mean, tears were shed. Everyone was okay. No major injuries, but a lot of damage. And then he said, okay, so for the second time, we're not going to have a speaker this week. We're, standing up for a meeting in the parking lot is not the right place. We'll find a new location in a week or two. But I want to go around one more time, and I want you to ask for anything you need. Is there anything you need that we can help you with? And I remember so vividly one person saying, the water main in my neighborhood is broken and we have no water. And somebody said, you know what? I've got 5-gallon bottles, like the old Sparklets bottles of water. You can have 4 of them. And hopefully that'll help. Come on by the house. I'll give them to you. Another person said, power's out at my house and we haven't had power for a couple of days. And someone said, I have a portable generator and we have power, so borrow my generator. And he did. And so here, I watched these people who were there to get referrals, but they had developed such good friendships that they helped each other personally. Your network truly is a beacon of hope in a sea of fear.
That's an incredible story, Ivan, and it just proves that even if you're not in business, those that you're connected to, your friendships, they will come through for you if you ever need help. And I think that's very powerful. For those that are listening, in the spirit of leaving no stone unturned, Ivan, do you have any last bits of advice, some parting words of wisdom for the people listening?
Well, first, I'd love to invite people to my blog, ivanmisner.com. It's all free content. Well, I've got links to my books there, but the blogs it's all free. And I've been blogging since 2007, so there's literally 1,500 different blogs up there. I'd leave you with this one thought. Michael, the old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. You've heard that before, yeah?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think it's either. I don't think it's what you know or who you know. It's how well you know each other that really counts. It's moving it from a contact to a connection that really counts. You got to ask yourself, okay, I know this person, but if I picked up the phone and I called them and I asked them for a favor, would they A, answer the phone, and would they B, consider the favor and possibly do the favor? That's the difference between a contact and a connection, a relationship that you have with people. And so it's not just who you know, it's how well you know each other that really makes a difference. And that's what I've been trying to teach people for the last 41 years. And it's worked pretty well. I don't think I mentioned this. Last year, we passed 17 million referrals in the organization. And we generated over 26 billion with a B, 26 billion US dollars in what we call thank you for closed business. That's the amount of business that our members generated for each other. Now, just to put that in perspective, if you take a look at United Nations estimates of GDP, gross domestic product, there are actually 100 countries in the world with a lower GDP than what BNI generated for its membership just last year. I am humbled by what this organization has become.
Well, it's definitely become a force for good, Ivan. And I know you mentioned the website and things, but I hear you have a book either out or coming out. So how can people grab that?
The book, you can find it on my blog. It is Networking is a Marathon, Not a Sprint. It's a phrase I've been using for a long time. And I thought, you know what, I should do the book on that concept. And so that is my latest book, Networking is a Marathon, Not a Sprint. It's available it's available on Amazon mostly. Yeah, Audible, Kindle, and print.
Thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Those that are listening, feel free to subscribe, share the show, tell others, and also leave a review wherever you are listening into your podcasts. Ivan, thanks so much. It's been great. I've enjoyed this, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Michael. It was a great interview.